The rope burns on Clara Whitmore's wrists had barely healed when her husband's fists found new places to bruise, and tonight she knew if she didn't run, she would die in that cabin outside Bent's Fort, Colorado territory. The year was 1876, and women like her had few choices, but death wasn't one she'd accept. She stumbled through the darkness, her thin cotton dress doing little against the October mountain air, her bare feet bleeding on the rocky ground as she pushed deeper into the wilderness. Behind her, she could hear Thomas bellowing her name, his voice thick with whiskey and rage. She'd taken nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that the mountains would hide her better than any town could. The moon barely penetrated the dense pine forest, and Clara's lungs burned as she climbed higher, away from the trading post settlement, away from the 3 years of hell she'd endured since marrying Thomas Whitmore. She'd been 18 then, fresh off a wagon train from Missouri, orphaned and alone. Thomas had seemed like salvation, a merchant with prospects, a man who smiled and promised her security. The smile disappeared the day after their wedding, replaced by demands, criticisms, and eventually violence that escalated with each passing month. A root caught her foot and she fell hard, skinning her palms on sharp stones. She bit back a cry, listening for pursuit. Thomas's shouts had faded, but she didn't trust it. He'd come after her before when she'd tried to flee to the fort's commander, had dragged her back with apologies and promises that lasted exactly 2 days. This time she'd waited until he'd drunk himself into a stupor, until his snoring rattled the cabin walls and she'd slipped out into the night. Clara pushed herself up, her hands trembling, and continued climbing. The wilderness terrified her, but not as much as going back. She'd heard stories about mountain men, trappers who lived in these high places, men as wild as the land itself. Some said they were dangerous, but others claimed they were honest in their roughness, unlike civilized men who hid their cruelty behind respectability. She had no destination, only the need to put distance between herself and Thomas. The night grew colder, and Clara's teeth began to chatter. Her dress was damp with dew and perspiration, her feet numb. She didn't know how long she'd been walking when exhaustion finally overtook fear. She found a depression beneath an outcropping of rock, crawled into it, and curled into a ball, her body shaking uncontrollably. Sleep came in fits, her dreams haunted by Thomas's face twisted in fury, his hands reaching for her throat. Dawn broke gray and cold. Clara woke to find frost on the ground around her, her body so stiff she could barely move. Her stomach cramped with hunger, her throat parched. She'd fled without water, without food, without any supplies at all. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as the reality of her situation crystallized. She was alone in the Rocky Mountains with winter approaching. No food, no shelter, no idea where to go. She forced herself to stand, whimpering at the pain in her feet. The cuts had stopped bleeding but were caked with dirt. She needed to keep moving, needed to find water. Clara chose a direction that seemed to lead further into the mountains and began walking, each step an agony. The sun climbed higher but brought little warmth. The forest was beautiful and terrifying, filled with sounds she couldn't identify. Once she heard something large moving through the brush and froze, her heart hammering, but whatever it was moved away. By midday she found a small stream and drank deeply, the cold water making her stomach cramp. She tried to clean her feet, but the water was so cold it hurt worse than leaving them dirty. Clara followed the stream, reasoning that water meant life, that perhaps she'd find a trapper's cabin or a settlement. Her hopes rose when she spotted what looked like a trail, faint but definitely man-made. She followed it as the afternoon shadows lengthened, her steps becoming more unsteady. Hunger gnawed at her insides, and the cold was seeping into her bones. She'd been foolish to run without preparation, but preparation would have meant Thomas catching her. Better to die free in these mountains than broken in that cabin. The trail led to a clearing, and in that clearing stood a cabin. Not the rough lean-to she'd expected, but a solid structure of chinked logs with a stone chimney and a small barn nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Clara's heart lurched with hope and fear. Someone lived here. Someone who might help her or might be as dangerous as what she'd fled. She approached slowly, her vision starting to blur at the edges. The cabin door was sturdy, and she raised her hand to knock, but her strength gave out. Her knuckles barely grazed the wood before her legs buckled and darkness swallowed her whole. The first thing Clara became aware of was warmth. Blessed, encompassing warmth that seemed to seep into her frozen bones. The second thing was softness beneath her, so different from the hard ground or the thin mattress she'd shared with Thomas. The third thing was a presence nearby, large and still, and fear jolted through her. Her eyes flew open and she tried to scramble away, but her body refused to cooperate. A deep voice, surprisingly gentle, spoke from somewhere above her. "Easy now. You're safe here. You collapsed on my porch." Clara's vision focused slowly. She was lying on a bed covered in thick furs, near a fireplace that radiated glorious heat. And standing several feet away, giving her space, was the largest man she'd ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the cabin. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle, his hands large enough to span her waist. He had long dark hair that fell past his shoulders, a thick beard and eyes that watched her with concern rather than threat. Everything about him spoke of strength, of power, of a man who could break her in half without effort. Clara's instinct was to cower, to make herself small, to prepare for the blow she was certain would come. Instead, he took a step back, making himself less imposing. "My name is Fletcher Jensen. You're in my cabin about 15 miles west of Bent's Fort. You've been unconscious for near about 3 hours. I cleaned your feet best I could and wrapped them, gave you some water. Didn't mean any disrespect, but you were in bad shape." His voice was like distant thunder, deep and rumbling, but there was a carefulness to it, as if he was aware of how he might frighten her. Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Fletcher moved slowly to a table and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. He approached the bed but stopped several feet away, extending the cup. "Can you sit up? Or should I leave this here for you to reach when you're ready?" The question surprised her. Thomas never asked what she needed or wanted. Fletcher waited, patient, and Clara slowly pushed herself up. Pain shot through her feet and she gasped. The mountain man's expression tightened with concern, but he didn't move closer. "Your feet are torn up pretty badly. Looks like you ran through rough country without shoes. I've got some salve that'll help with the healing." Clara reached for the cup, her hand shaking. Fletcher moved closer, just close enough to hand it to her, then immediately stepped back. She drank greedily, the water the best thing she'd ever tasted. When the cup was empty, she finally found her voice. "Thank you." It came out as barely a whisper. "You're welcome to stay until you're healed up. I've got food if you're hungry. Venison stew's been simmering most of the day." At the mention of food, Clara's stomach clenched painfully. She nodded, and Fletcher moved to the fireplace where a pot hung over the flames. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her with a spoon, again maintaining that careful distance. Clara took the bowl with both hands and began to eat. The stew was rich and flavorful, full of meat and vegetables, and she had to force herself not to wolf it down too quickly. Fletcher returned to the other side of the cabin, giving her space, busying himself with checking supplies on shelves. She watched him as she ate, trying to reconcile his size and obvious strength with his gentle manner. "How did you find yourself out here without shoes or supplies?" he asked after a few minutes, his tone conversational rather than demanding. Clara stiffened, the spoon halfway to her mouth. She didn't want to tell him, didn't want to speak the words that would reveal her shame. But something in his steady gaze made her feel that he already understood, at least in part. "I was running from my husband," she said finally, her voice small. Fletcher nodded slowly, his jaw tightening beneath his beard. "He the one who gave you those bruises?" Clara's hand instinctively went to her throat, where she knew the marks from Thomas's last attack still showed. She nodded. "He won't find you here," Fletcher said, and there was steel beneath the gentleness now. "My cabin's not easy to locate unless you know where you're going. You're safe here for as long as you need." The words were simple, but they struck Clara deeply. Safe. When was the last time she'd felt safe? Not in the 3 years with Thomas, certainly. Not on the wagon train west, where danger lurked in every river crossing and mountain pass. Perhaps not since her parents died of cholera, leaving her alone at 17. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, the response automatic. Thomas had told her constantly that she was a burden, useless, more trouble than she was worth. "You're not a burden. I don't get much company up here, and it'll be nice to have someone to talk to." Fletcher moved to a chest and pulled out what looked like a shirt. "This might work as a night dress for now. I'll see about getting you some proper clothes. There's a settlement about a day's ride from here where I trade my furs. I can make the trip tomorrow if you're comfortable here alone, or I can wait until you're feeling stronger." "You do that. For a stranger." Fletcher looked at her with those steady eyes. "You're not a stranger anymore, Clara. You're someone who needed help, and I've got help to give. That's how it works up here in the mountains. We take care of each other." "How do you know my name?" "You talked some in your fever. Nothing too clear, but your name came through." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wondered what else she'd said, what secrets she'd revealed while unconscious. But Fletcher didn't seem inclined to pry, and she was grateful for that. She finished the stew, warmth finally spreading through her core. Fletcher took the bowl and spoon, then showed her where the necessary was outside, offering his arm to help her walk. Clara hesitated before taking it, and when her fingers closed around his forearm, she felt the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. But his touch remained gentle, supporting without gripping, letting her set the pace as they moved slowly to the door. The evening air was cold but fresh, and Clara breathed deeply. The mountains stretched out in every direction, peaks turning purple in the fading light. It was beautiful and vast, and for the first time since fleeing she felt something other than fear. Fletcher helped her back inside, then turned his attention to building up the fire for the night. "You take the bed," he said. "I've got bedding to make a place by the fire. It's what I usually do anyway when winter's coming on. Warmer that way. I can't take your bed. You can and you will. You need rest and warmth to heal. I'm not arguing about it." His tone was firm but not harsh, a statement of fact rather than a command. It was so different from Thomas's orders that Clara found herself nodding in acceptance. Fletcher made good on his word, arranging furs near the hearth. As full darkness fell, he banked the fire to a steady glow and settled onto his makeshift bed. Clara lay beneath the furs on his bed, warmer than she'd been in months, her stomach full, her body beginning to relax despite the pain in her feet. "Fletcher," she said into the darkness. "Yes. Why are you being so kind to me?" There was a long pause, and Clara wondered if she'd offended him. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I guess because I know what it's like to need help and not get it. I know what it's like when people turn away because getting involved is too much trouble. And I decided a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to help someone, I would. No questions, no conditions. Just help because it's the right thing to do. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She'd cried so much over the past 3 years, tears of pain and frustration and despair. But these tears were different, born of something she'd almost forgotten existed: kindness. Simple, uncomplicated kindness from a stranger who asked nothing in return. "Thank you," she whispered. "Get some rest, Clara. Tomorrow you can start healing." She closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and Fletcher's steady breathing, and for the first time in years, she slept without fear. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, and she heard Fletcher moving around quietly, trying not to disturb her. She pushed herself up, testing her feet. They were still painful but better than yesterday, the salve Fletcher had applied working its magic. "Good morning," Fletcher said when he noticed she was awake. "How are you feeling?" "Better, sore but better." "That's good. I made breakfast. Figure you could use a solid meal." He helped her to the table, and Clara found herself studying him in the daylight. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, economical and efficient in his actions. His cabin was neat, everything in its place, well maintained. It spoke of a man who took care of what was his, who respected his belongings and his space. The breakfast was simple but delicious: bacon, eggs from chickens she could hear clucking outside, and thick slices of bread with butter. Clara ate slowly, savoring every bite. Fletcher ate as well, but she noticed he gave her the larger portions, keeping less for himself. "I'm thinking I should ride to the settlement today," he said. "Get you some proper clothes, some shoes, maybe some other supplies. Will you be all right here alone?" Fear flickered through Clara. What if Thomas found her? But she pushed it down. Fletcher was right. This cabin was well hidden, and Thomas wouldn't know where to look. Besides, she couldn't let fear control her forever. "I'll be fine. But I have no money to pay you back." Didn't ask for payment. "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better, something you can repay when you're back on your feet and settled somewhere." "You trust me to repay you?" Fletcher looked at her steadily. "Yes, I do. You've got honest eyes, Clara. You're not the type to cheat someone." No one had called her honest in years. Thomas had accused her of being a liar, a sneak, untrustworthy, even though she'd never given him cause to think so. Hearing Fletcher's simple faith in her was almost overwhelming. "I'll be back before dark," Fletcher continued. "There's food in the pantry, water in the pitcher. If you get cold, build up the fire, but be careful with it. I've got books on that shelf if you want something to read. Don't try to go outside much, not with your feet still healing. And if anyone comes around, which they won't, you hide in that root cellar there." He pointed to a trapdoor in the corner. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." "I understand." Fletcher gathered his things, strapping on a large knife and taking a rifle from above the door. Seeing the weapons should have frightened Clara, but instead she felt reassured. This was a man who could protect himself and others, who was prepared for danger. Before he left, he turned back to her. "Clara, I meant what I said. You're safe here. I'll be back soon." Then he was gone, and Clara heard the sound of a horse being saddled, then hoofbeats fading into the distance. She sat in the quiet cabin, alone for the first time since arriving, and took stock of her situation. She'd escaped Thomas. She'd survived a night in the wilderness. She'd found shelter with a man who seemed genuinely kind. Her feet were healing. She'd had 2 solid meals, and she was warm and safe. It was more than she dared hope for when she fled into the darkness 2 nights ago. Clara rose carefully and explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was a single large room with the bed in one corner, a cooking area near the fireplace, the table and chairs in the center, and storage along the walls. Everything was well made and sturdy, clearly built by someone who knew what they were doing. There were indeed books on the shelf, more than she'd expected. Classics like Shakespeare and Dickens, but also practical volumes on animal tracking, plant identification, and wilderness survival. She selected a book of poetry and settled into a chair near the fire, propping her feet up. The morning passed peacefully, the words on the page washing over her, soothing in their rhythm and beauty. At midday, she ate some bread and cheese from the pantry, careful not to take too much, aware of how much Fletcher had already given her. The afternoon stretched long, and Clara found her thoughts turning to the future. She couldn't stay here forever, living off Fletcher's charity. He'd mentioned a settlement, perhaps she could find work there, make her own way. But she was a married woman, bound by law to Thomas. The thought made her stomach clench. Legally, everything she was and had belonged to him. If he found her, he could force her back, and no law would stop him, unless she could prove he'd tried to kill her. But who would believe a woman over her husband? And even if they did, a divorce was scandalous, difficult to obtain, and would mark her forever as a fallen woman. Her options were limited, each path fraught with danger or difficulty. Clara was so lost in thought that she almost didn't hear the horse approaching. When she did, fear shot through her. Fletcher had said he'd be back before dark, but it was only mid-afternoon. What if it wasn't Fletcher? What if Thomas had somehow tracked her? She moved as quickly as her injured feet allowed to the window, peering out carefully. Relief flooded through her when she saw Fletcher's broad form riding into the clearing, saddlebags bulging with supplies. He'd returned much earlier than expected. She opened the door as he dismounted, and he looked surprised to see her up and moving. "I told you to stay off those feet." "I'm being careful. You're back early. Made good time, and the trader had what I needed." He pulled the saddlebags off and carried them inside, Clara hobbling after him. "Let's see if any of this fits." Fletcher had brought 2 simple dresses, one dark blue and one brown, both practical calico suited for frontier life. There were undergarments as well, stockings, and a sturdy pair of boots. He'd also purchased a heavy shawl, a hairbrush, and various other necessities. Clara stared at the items spread across the table, overwhelmed. "This is too much. This must have cost a fortune. I do all right with my trapping and trading. Besides, winter's coming and you need to be prepared." He pulled out more items: salt, flour, coffee, dried beans, and various other foodstuffs. "Got some extra supplies while I was there. Fletcher, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." He waved a hand dismissively. "Try on the dresses, see if they fit. I had to guess on the size." Clara took the garments, and Fletcher politely turned his back, busying himself with putting away the food supplies. She changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons she hadn't realized she'd missed during her ordeal. The blue dress fit reasonably well, perhaps a bit loose, but that was better than too tight. The fabric was soft against her skin, clean and new, and Clara felt almost human again. "It fits," she said, and Fletcher turned around. Something flickered in his eyes as he looked at her, an expression she couldn't quite read. But it wasn't the possessive hunger she'd seen in Thomas's gaze. It was something softer, almost admiring but respectful. "The color suits you," he said simply. "Matches your eyes." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She couldn't remember the last time someone had paid her a genuine compliment. She touched the fabric self-consciously. "Thank you for everything. I don't just mean the clothes, I mean all of it. Helping me, giving me shelter, being kind." Fletcher shifted, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing what any decent person would do. You'd be surprised how few decent people there are in the world. Then maybe you've been in the wrong parts of the world." Clara smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face after so long. Maybe you're right. They settled into an easy routine over the following days. Fletcher tended to his traps and hunted, preparing for winter, while Clara rested and healed. As her feet improved, she began helping around the cabin, cooking meals and mending clothes, small ways to contribute that made her feel less like a burden. Fletcher never asked her to work, but he accepted her help with quiet appreciation. They talked during the long evenings, Fletcher sharing stories of his life in the mountains. He'd come west 8 years ago at 20 years old, fleeing a life back east that he only hinted at. His father had been a harsh man, a circuit judge who believed in iron discipline, and had no patience for a son who preferred the outdoors to law books. Fletcher had left as soon as he was able, making his way to the frontier where a man's worth was measured by his skills and character rather than his family name. Clara shared less of her own story, but what she did reveal came easier as the days passed. She told Fletcher about her parents, good people who dreamed of a new life in California but never made it past Colorado. About being alone at 17 with nothing but the clothes on her back. About Thomas, who'd seemed like a savior but became her jailer. "I should have seen it," she said one evening, staring into the fire. There were signs, small things. The way he talked about other people, always critical, always finding fault. How he needed everything to be just so and would get angry if it wasn't. But I was desperate, and I ignored what I didn't want to see. "That doesn't make it your fault," Fletcher said firmly. "People like him are good at hiding what they are until they've got you trapped. You can't blame yourself for wanting security, for believing in someone's promises." "I was so stupid." "You were hopeful. That's not the same as stupid." Fletcher leaned forward, his expression serious. "Clara, listen to me. What he did to you, that's on him, not you. You didn't deserve it, you didn't cause it, and you had every right to run." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. She'd needed to hear those words, needed someone to tell her that she wasn't crazy, wasn't worthless, wasn't at fault for her own abuse. Fletcher's steady conviction in her innocence was like a balm on wounds she hadn't known how to heal. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, and Clara found herself watching Fletcher in the firelight. He was whittling a piece of wood, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy, shaping what looked like a small bird. There was something peaceful about him, a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and being comfortable with it. She'd been afraid of him at first, his size and strength so reminiscent of the violence she'd experienced. But Fletcher had shown her that strength didn't have to mean cruelty, that power could be wielded gently. In all their time together, he'd never raised his voice, never made a threatening move, never tried to control or dominate her. He asked rather than commanded, suggested rather than demanded, and always gave her space and choice. Clara realized with a start that she felt safe with him. Truly safe, in a way she'd never felt with anyone, not even her parents who'd been kind but often overwhelmed by the hardships of pioneer life. Fletcher made her feel protected without making her feel imprisoned, cared for without making her feel owned. The realization brought its own fear. What if she was mistaking gratitude for something more? What if she was simply latching onto the first person who'd shown her kindness? She couldn't afford to make another mistake with a man, couldn't trust her own judgment after Thomas. But watching Fletcher work, seeing the concentration on his face as he brought the wooden bird to life, Clara knew it was more than gratitude. There was something about him that called to her, something solid and real and good. She was drawn to his quiet strength, his gentle manner, the way he seemed to understand her without needing constant explanation. She was falling for him, Clara realized with both wonder and terror. After everything she'd been through, after swearing she'd never trust a man again. Here she was developing feelings for a mountain man who'd shown her nothing but kindness. Fletcher looked up and caught her staring. For a moment their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing connection neither had spoken aloud. Fletcher cleared his throat and returned his attention to his carving, but Clara saw the slight smile playing at his lips. 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, the first snow fell. She woke to see white flakes drifting past the window, and a sense of peace settled over her. The snow would make tracking difficult, would hide her trail even further, would make it nearly impossible for Thomas to reach this high cabin even if he somehow discovered its location. Fletcher had warned her that once the heavy snows came, they'd be isolated until spring. His cabin was well stocked, and he assured her they'd have plenty of food and fuel, but they'd be alone together for months. Clara knew she should feel trapped by that prospect, should fear being confined with a man regardless of how kind he'd been. Instead, she felt relieved. The thought of leaving Fletcher, of returning to the world where she was married to Thomas, where she had no rights and no protection, filled her with dread. Here in this cabin, she was simply Clara. Not someone's property, not someone's victim, just herself, free to heal and grow and rediscover who she was beneath the damage. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Fletcher said, coming to stand beside her at the window. He maintained that careful distance he always did, never crowding her, never assuming the right to touch. "Yes, I used to love snow as a child. It made everything seem clean and new, still does. World gets quiet under snow, peaceful, makes you appreciate the simple things." Clara glanced up at him. "Is that why you stay here?" "For the peace, partly. Also because out here, a man's judged by what he does, not what he came from. I like the honesty of it. Nature doesn't lie to you. If you're not prepared for winter, you suffer. If you respect the mountains, they'll provide. It's straightforward in a way civilized life never was." "Do you ever get lonely?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment. "Used to, not so much anymore. I've made friends among the other trappers and the native tribes. And lately," he paused, then continued softly, "I've had good company." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. She wanted to reach out and touch his hand, to close the distance between them, but fear held her back. Not fear of Fletcher, but fear of her own vulnerability, of wanting something she might not be able to have. The days grew shorter and colder as November arrived. Clara's feet healed completely, and she took over most of the indoor work, letting Fletcher focus on the demanding outdoor tasks of winter preparation. She cooked, cleaned, mended, and organized, finding satisfaction in the domestic rhythms. But unlike with Thomas, where housework was a demanded duty she could never perform well enough, with Fletcher it was a choice, a contribution she made freely because she wanted to help, not because she feared the consequences of failing. They fell into an easy partnership, working together seamlessly. Fletcher would bring in wood and Clara would stack it. He'd hunt and she'd prepare the meat for storage. He'd check his traps and she'd work the furs. They moved around each other in the small cabin like dancers who'd practiced their routine for years rather than weeks, and through it all, the connection between them deepened. Clara found herself craving Fletcher's presence when he was out, listening for his return. She noticed small things about him. The way he hummed tunelessly while working, how he always made sure she ate first, the gentle way he handled animals. Fletcher, for his part, seemed equally aware of her. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, his expression soft and wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. They talked late into the nights, sharing dreams and fears and memories. Fletcher told her about his mother, a gentle woman who died when he was 12, leaving him at the mercy of his cold father. Clara shared her childhood, the good years before sickness and hardship took her parents. They discussed books, debated philosophy, laughed at shared jokes, and fell into comfortable silences that felt as intimate as words. But neither spoke of the growing feelings between them. Clara, because she was afraid to presume, afraid to offer something that might not be wanted, or that she might not be free to give. Fletcher, because he seemed to sense her fragility, her need for time and space to heal from wounds both physical and emotional. One evening in late November, Clara was brushing out her hair before bed, a task she'd come to enjoy now that she had proper supplies and no one to criticize how she looked. Fletcher was banking the fire, his back to her, but she saw him still, saw the tension in his shoulders. "Fletcher," she said softly. He turned, and his breath caught visibly when he saw her. With her hair down, loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical braid, Clara felt suddenly self-conscious. She'd filled out during her time in the cabin, no longer the half-starved waif who'd collapsed on his porch. The good food and lack of constant stress had brought color to her cheeks and a healthy glow to her skin. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, setting down the brush with trembling hands. "Why haven't you asked me to leave, or tried to send me somewhere else?" Fletcher came closer, stopping at what had become his usual distance, that careful space he always maintained. "Because you're not ready to leave, and because I don't want you to go." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Clara's heart pounded. "I don't want to go either, but Fletcher, I'm married. Legally, I belong to Thomas, and if he ever found me, he won't. But if he did, the law would side with him. I'd have to go back. No law reaches this high in the mountains, and even if it did, I wouldn't let him take you. You're not property, Clara. You're a person, and you have the right to choose your own life. It's not that simple." "Maybe it should be." Fletcher took a step closer, then another, slowly closing the distance between them. Clara's breath quickened, but it wasn't fear that made her pulse race. "Clara, I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen all the way through before you say anything." She nodded, unable to speak. "I know you've been through hell. I know you need time to heal, and I've tried to give you that. But I also need you to know that you're not alone here because I'm a good Christian doing his duty. You're here because from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like calls to like, Clara. You're brave and strong and beautiful, and spending these weeks with you has been the best time of my life." Clara felt tears welling up, but she blinked them back, needing to hear everything he had to say. "I've fallen in love with you," Fletcher continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know the timing's terrible. I know you might not feel the same way, and I know you've got every reason not to trust any man ever again. But I couldn't let another day pass without telling you the truth. You don't have to respond. You don't have to do anything with this information. I just needed you to know." Clara stood, her legs shaking. Fletcher was so close now, close enough to touch, and she raised her hand slowly to his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palm. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm terrified that I'm wrong about you, that this is all some elaborate trap, that I'll wake up one day and find out you're just like him. I know, and I can't promise to never make mistakes or never hurt you accidentally. But Clara, I swear on my life that I will never deliberately harm you. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will never try to control or diminish you. You would always be my partner, my equal, not my possession. How can you promise that? Because I saw what my father's cruelty did to my mother. I saw her spirit break a little more each day until there was nothing left but a shadow. I watched her die, and I swore I would never, ever be the kind of man who crushes the life out of someone they're supposed to love. I'd rather die alone than become him." The raw honesty in Fletcher's voice, The pain and conviction intertwined broke through Clara's final defenses. She'd been holding herself so carefully, protecting her battered heart, but she couldn't do it anymore. She didn't want to. "I love you too," she said, and watched wonder bloom across Fletcher's face. "I've been falling for weeks now, trying to talk myself out of it, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or fear of being alone. But it's not. It's you. It's how safe I feel with you, how you make me laugh, how you see me as a person worth listening to. I love you, Fletcher Jensen, and it terrifies me." "Can I hold you?" Fletcher asked, his hands hovering but not touching. "I've wanted to hold you so many times, but I didn't want to push, didn't want to make you uncomfortable." Clara nodded, and slowly, carefully, Fletcher's arms came around her. He held her so gently, as if she were made of spun glass, his embrace protective but not confining. She could have stepped away at any moment, and they both knew it. But Clara didn't step away. Instead, she moved closer, pressing against his solid warmth, and felt something inside her finally, completely relax. She'd never been held without pain before. Every touch from Thomas had been possessive, demanding, often a prelude to violence. But Fletcher held her like she was precious, like the most important thing in the world was making sure she felt safe and cherished. One of his large hands cradled the back of her head, the other rested lightly on her back, and Clara realized she was crying. "It's all right," Fletcher murmured against her hair. "You're safe, I've got you," and she was safe. For the first time in years, Clara felt completely, utterly safe. The fear and tension she'd carried for so long began to dissolve in the warmth of Fletcher's embrace. She cried for everything she'd endured, for the years of pain and humiliation, for the girl she'd been who'd had to become hard just to survive. And Fletcher held her through it all, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. When the tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back just enough to look up at him. Fletcher's eyes were wet too, and he smiled down at her with such tenderness that her heart ached. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to fall apart. Don't apologize. You've earned the right to cry, to feel, to let it all out. I'm honored that you trust me enough to do it." Clara reached up and touched his bearded face, feeling the softness of the hair and the strong jaw beneath. Fletcher closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, a slight shudder running through him. "No one's touched me gently in 8 years," he said softly. "Not since my mother died. I'd forgotten what it felt like." The admission broke Clara's heart. Here was this strong, capable man who'd been alone for so long, who'd built walls around himself just as she had. They were both wounded, both scarred by life, and yet they'd found each other in this remote mountain cabin, two broken pieces that somehow fit together. "Then we'll have to make up for lost time," Clara said, and stood on her toes to press a kiss to his cheek. Fletcher's arms tightened around her slightly, still gentle but more secure, and he turned his head so his forehead rested against hers. "We'll take this slow," he said. "As slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We've got all winter, all the time in the world. What about spring? What happens when the snow melts and the world comes back? Then we figure it out together. Maybe we stay here, maybe we go somewhere new, start fresh where no one knows you as Thomas Whitmore's wife. There are territories out west where people don't ask too many questions, where you could be Clara Jensen if you wanted." "Are you proposing to me?" Clara asked, half teasing, half serious. "Not yet. When I propose, you'll know it because I'll do it right. But I'm saying that I want a future with you, whatever shape that takes. I'm saying that as far as I'm concerned, you're already my family, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe and happy." Clara kissed him then, properly, on the lips. It was gentle and sweet, a tentative exploration rather than a demand. Fletcher responded carefully, letting her set the pace, his hands remaining respectfully on her back. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "I think I like this slow," Clara said with a small smile. Fletcher laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Good, because I plan on courting you proper even if we're stuck in a cabin in the middle of nowhere." "How do you court someone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" "Guess we'll find out together." That night, Clara slept in Fletcher's arms for the first time. He held her close but not tight, his body a warm, solid presence against her back. She'd worried she might have nightmares, might panic at being held while vulnerable, but instead she slept deeper and more peacefully than she had in years. And when she woke in the morning to find Fletcher still there, still holding her, still treating her with that remarkable gentleness, she felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever: hope. The winter passed in a cocoon of growing love and deepening trust. Fletcher courted Clara with a sweetness that never failed to surprise her. He carved small gifts for her: animals, flowers, even a delicate hair comb. He left notes written on birch bark expressing his affection in simple, heartfelt words. He cooked her favorite meals when he noticed what she enjoyed most. He read to her in the evenings, his deep voice bringing poetry and stories to life. And most importantly, he continued to respect her boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, from kisses to longer embraces to falling asleep together each night. Clara appreciated Fletcher's patience more than she could express. He was giving her the time and space to reclaim her own body, to learn that touch could be pleasurable rather than painful, that intimacy could be a choice rather than an obligation. One night in January, with a blizzard howling outside and the cabin warm and secure, Clara turned in Fletcher's arms to face him. They'd been lying quietly, listening to the wind, and she'd been thinking about how far she'd come, how much she'd healed. "I'm ready," she said softly. Fletcher's eyes searched her face. "Ready for what? To be with you, fully, as your woman in every way. Clara, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. I trust you, Fletcher. I love you. And I want to know what it's like to be with someone who sees me as more than just a body to be used." Fletcher cupped her face in his large hands, his touch reverent. "Are you sure? Absolutely sure? Because there's no rush, no pressure. I'm sure. Show me what it's supposed to be like. Show me how it feels when someone truly loves you." What followed was a revelation for Clara. Fletcher was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. He took his time, making the experience about pleasure and connection rather than just satisfaction. And when Clara finally fell asleep afterward, cradled against Fletcher's chest, she felt whole in a way she never had before. Fletcher had shown her that intimacy could be beautiful, that her body was her own, and that love between two people could be tender and passionate and safe all at once. He'd given her back something Thomas had stolen, and she loved him even more for it. As winter deepened and then began its slow retreat, Clara and Fletcher built a life together in their mountain sanctuary. They were partners in every sense, sharing work and play, laughter and serious discussions, dreams for the future and appreciation for the present. Clara learned wilderness skills from Fletcher, how to track and hunt and read the weather. Fletcher learned from Clara's knowledge of herbs and healing, her way with words, her ability to find beauty in small things. They talked about what would come when spring arrived. Fletcher had connections in California, friends who'd moved to the gold country and written him letters about the opportunities there. California was far from Colorado, far from Thomas and any chance of him finding them. It was a place where they could start fresh, where Clara could become Clara Jensen without legal complications. "What if someone finds out?" Clara asked one evening as they discussed their plans. "What if someone discovers I was married before?" then we deal with it. But Clara, the West is full of people reinventing themselves, running from pasts they'd rather forget. No one's going to dig too deep into your history if we don't give them reason to. And if Thomas ever does show up, which he won't, he'll have to go through me. There was steel in Fletcher's voice when he spoke of Thomas, a protective edge that Clara found reassuring rather than frightening. She knew Fletcher would defend her if necessary, but she also knew he'd never seek out violence, never use his strength to intimidate or control. He was a protector, not an aggressor, and she trusted him completely. March brought the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the world beneath in shades of brown and green. Fletcher made a trip to Bent's fort for supplies and returned with news that made Clara's blood run cold. "Thomas Whitmore's been asking around about you," Fletcher said carefully, watching her face. "Seems he's been searching since you left, putting word out to all the trading posts and settlements. He's claiming you're not right in the head, that you need to be brought back for your own protection." Clara felt the old fear rise up, but she pushed it down. She wasn't the same terrified woman who'd fled into the night. She was stronger now, supported by Fletcher's love and her own growing confidence. "What do? We leave like we planned. I've already been preparing. We'll head west in 2 weeks, soon as the passes are clear enough to navigate safely. I've got friends who'll help us, trappers who know routes that avoid the main trails. We'll be in California by summer, and Thomas will never find you. Are you sure about this?" "About leaving your home, your life here." Fletcher pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "You're my home now, Clara. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. I'd give up anything to keep you safe and happy." "I love you so much," Clara whispered against his chest. "I love you too. And I promise you, we're going to have a good life, a free life, the life you deserve." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Fletcher sold his cabin and most of his belongings to another trapper, keeping only what they could carry on horseback. Clara helped pack supplies, her heart divided between excitement for their new life and sadness at leaving the place where she'd healed and found love. The night before they were set to leave, Fletcher knelt before Clara as she sat by the fireplace. He took her hands in his expression solemn and tender. "Clara Whitmore, I know I'm not proposing to you legally, not yet. But in my heart, in every way that matters, I want you to be my wife. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, protecting you, being your partner and your friend. Will you have me?" Clara felt tears stream down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I'm already yours, Fletcher, in every way that matters." Fletcher pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band he'd crafted from silver during the long winter nights. He slid it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. "When we get to California, we'll make it legal. But as of right now, in the eyes of God and my own heart, you're my wife. I'll honor you and cherish you all my days. And I'll love you and stand by you all of mine." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and that night they loved each other with new depth and commitment, knowing they were bound together by something stronger than legal papers. They were choosing each other freely, without coercion or desperation, just pure love and devotion. At dawn, they mounted their horses and rode west, leaving the cabin and the mountains behind. The journey was long and sometimes difficult, but Clara never regretted it. With Fletcher by her side, she felt capable of anything. They traveled for weeks, following trails only Fletcher and his mountain man friends knew, avoiding settlements where Thomas might have spread word. They saw wonders along the way, vast prairies that stretched to the horizon, deserts that glowed red in the sunset, mountain ranges that pierced the sky. Fletcher showed her his world, the wild places he loved, and Clara fell in love with the frontier's raw beauty. They met other travelers, mostly trappers and prospectors heading west for their own reasons. Fletcher introduced Clara as his wife, and no one questioned it. She was Clara Jensen now, at least in practice, and with each day that passed, she felt more like that person and less like the broken woman who'd fled into the darkness. They reached California in July of 1877, settling in a small but growing town called Ridgway in the Sierra Nevada foothills. It was beautiful country, still rough but civilizing, with enough people that they weren't isolated but not so many that Clara's past was likely to catch up with her. Fletcher used the money from selling his cabin to buy land and start a small ranch. Clara helped build their new home, working alongside Fletcher to raise walls and plant crops. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way nothing in her life with Thomas had ever been. She was building something that was hers, creating a life with a man who valued her contributions and respected her opinions. They made friends in Ridgway, becoming part of the community. Clara joined the church ladies in their charitable work, and Fletcher became known as a reliable man, someone neighbors could count on. No one asked intrusive questions about their past, and gradually Clara's fear of discovery faded. A year after arriving in California, they were married legally. A circuit judge came through town, and Fletcher and Clara stood before him and their friends, exchanging the same vows they'd spoken to each other in the mountain cabin. Clara wore a simple white dress that the seamstress in town had helped her make, and Fletcher wore his best clothes, his long hair trimmed but still brushing his shoulders. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, and Fletcher kissed her before God and everybody, Clara felt a peace settle over her soul. She was truly Clara Jensen now, legally and in every other way. Her past with Thomas seemed like a nightmare she'd finally woken from, and her present with Fletcher was everything she'd ever dreamed of and more. They built a good life in Ridgway. Fletcher's ranch prospered, and Clara started a small garden business, selling vegetables and herbs to the growing town. She had a gift for growing things, and people appreciated her knowledge and fair prices. Together, they became prosperous in a modest way, not rich but comfortable, with enough to share with those who had less. 2 years into their California life, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and fear in equal measure. She'd never imagined having children with Thomas, couldn't have borne bringing a child into that violent household. But with Fletcher, she wanted it desperately, wanted to create new life with the man she loved, wanted to raise a child in a home filled with gentleness and laughter. Fletcher was overjoyed, treating Clara like she was made of spun glass, even though she insisted she was perfectly healthy. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with birds and flowers, and Clara sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. Their son was born in April of 1879, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Daniel, after Fletcher's grandfather, the only member of his family Fletcher had loved. Clara held her baby and cried happy tears, overwhelmed by the love she felt, by the miracle of this new life they'd created together. Fletcher was an incredible father, patient and playful and tender. Clara would often find him holding Daniel against his broad chest, humming tunelessly as he walked the floor, or talking to the baby about the ranch and the mountains, and all the things they'd do together when Daniel was older. Watching her husband with their son filled Clara with such happiness she sometimes couldn't believe her life was real. But it was real. This was her life now. A good man who loved her, a beautiful son, a home she'd helped build, a community where she belonged. The scared, broken woman who'd fled into the Colorado mountains seemed like a stranger now, though Clara never forgot her. She'd earned her peace through suffering, and she cherished it all the more because of what it had cost, When Daniel was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This time a daughter joined their family, a tiny girl they named Sarah, who had her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair. Their family was complete, and their home was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and love. Years passed in contentment. Fletcher and Clara raised their children with care, teaching them to be strong and kind, to respect themselves and others, to value hard work and honesty. Daniel grew tall and strong like his father, while Sarah was clever and quick, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. Clara never heard from Thomas again. She didn't know if he'd given up searching or if he'd died or simply moved on to another victim. She didn't care. That chapter of her life was closed, and she refused to let it cast a shadow on her present happiness. Sometimes, late at night, Fletcher would hold Clara close and tell her how grateful he was that she'd stumbled into his life, how she'd made him complete in ways he hadn't known he was incomplete. And Clara would tell him how he'd saved her, not just from Thomas but from losing herself entirely, how his gentle strength had shown her what love was supposed to be. "You held me so softly," she said one night, many years into their marriage, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "That first time you held me in the cabin, I'd never been held without pain before. I didn't know it was possible." Fletcher pulled her closer, his arms still strong despite the gray threading through his hair. "You deserved softness. You deserved everything good. I'm just glad I was the one who got to give it to you. You gave me my life back. You gave me a future I never thought I'd have. We gave each other a future. You saved me too, Clara. I was just existing up in those mountains, not really living. You showed me what it meant to connect with someone, to open my heart. We saved each other." Clara leaned against him, perfectly content, perfectly safe, perfectly loved. Around them, their ranch bustled with life. Their children playing in the yard, chickens clucking, horses nickering in the barn. It was everything she'd never dared dream of during those dark years with Thomas. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the California sky in shades of gold and pink, Clara reflected on her journey. From the terrified woman fleeing into the Colorado wilderness to the confident, happy woman she'd become, she traveled far in more ways than just miles. And through it all, Fletcher had been her anchor, her safe harbor, the man who'd shown her that love didn't have to hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For everything. For being you, for loving me the way you do." Fletcher kissed the top of her head, his arms secure around her. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built a life of love and safety and joy from the ashes of their painful pasts. And as stars began to appear in the vast western sky, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, held softly by the man who'd shown her what it meant to finally feel safe. Their story was one of healing and hope, of second chances and new beginnings. From that cold October night when Clara collapsed on Fletcher's porch to this warm California evening surrounded by the family they'd built together, they'd created something beautiful and lasting. And it all started with a gentle touch, with a mountain man who understood that true strength lay not in force but in tenderness, with a woman brave enough to trust again despite every reason not to. Together, they proved that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that safety could be found in unexpected places, and that holding someone softly was sometimes the strongest thing you could do. As Clara drifted off to sleep that night, safe in Fletcher's arms as she had been every night for years, she smiled. She'd finally found her home, not in a place but in a person, in the man who held her like she was precious, who loved her like she deserved, who'd given her the greatest gift of all, a life without fear, a future without pain, a love that would last until their final days.